Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. For those who have watched this channel for a while now, you know I'm pretty concerned, just in a general way, about sort of these international protocols associated with travel and health mandates and things that I don't think anybody ever in a million years thought that some largely opaque international bureaucracy should not really have this level of power over people's day-to-day lives. I have serious issues with that just in a general sense. And I've discussed that in other videos. Also, the way in which that this seems to be the attempt to promulgate this, especially through the U.S. immigration system, U.S. legal system, specifically, saying that, well, this isn't a new treaty, we're just changing an old treaty. Well, yeah, it's called advise and consent. And when you change the text of a treaty, you're changing the treaty. That means it's a new treaty. You need the Senate to weigh in the U.S., and I've talked about that already. And I, probably screaming into the abyss here, but I've brought that up in the past. I thought of making this video after reading a recent article from Zero Hedge, and Zero Hedge is actually quoting one Alex Newman via the Epoch Times. Article is titled, UN Seeks Vast New Powers for Global Emergencies. Lot going on in here. I'm going to quote some excerpts here, quoting directly. The United Nations is seeking vast new powers and stronger, quote, global governance, unquote, tools to deal with international emergencies such as pandemics and economic crises. Now, this is interesting. This all started out in the context of international health regulation. And now it's kind of, international economic crises is kind of being wedged in there. Quoting further, a new UN policy brief was revealed and the Biden administration appears to support the proposal. Quoting further, the plan to create an quote, emergency platform, unquote, which would involve a set of protocols activated during crises. And that then begs the question, who defines a crisis? That we talked about that a few years ago in a similar context. How do you define what this crisis is? Quoting further, that could affect billions of people has already drawn strong concern and criticism from U.S. policymakers and analysts. Among those expressing concern is House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Representative Michael McCaul, Republican from Texas, whose committee oversees U.S. foreign policy and involvement in international organizations. Quote, we must be sure that any global protocol or platform operated by the UN respects U.S. national sovereignty and U.S. taxpayer dollars, unquote, McCall told the Epoch Times. Quoting further, he also noted his concern that the proposed platform expands the authority and funding of the U.S. and the definitions of, quote, emergency, unquote, and, quote, crisis, unquote, to include, for instance, climate change. Again, the definition of crisis in all of this is a really important factor. My personal opinion is countries can do this on their own. Thailand did a perfectly good job of handling these issues itself. U.S. did too, quite honestly. I don't understand why some supranational organization needs to come in over the top of these countries and dictate to them, A, what a crisis is, and B, what the response to it will be. It really, anybody that doesn't see the very scary, not to be simplistic in my terminology, but the terrifying ramifications this could have, and also who's accountable here. The biggest thing I noticed going from 2020 through to, whatever it was, October 2022, during this COVID lockdown and all of this stuff, was who at the end of the day could you point to and say, well, this is the person that's making that call? They had a bunch of spokespeople. They had a bunch of people that were experts in things, but who at the end of the day made the call that said, we're going to shut everything down? Who made that decision? Who made that determination? I never could get a clear answer on that. It was all, well, we do it by consensus, and which in political parlance, and I'm not picking on Thailand, the U.S., other countries. I mean, I did a lot of research on this because I had a lot of time on my hands for a couple of years to look at it, every time you look, well, it was done by consensus. Well, that's bureaucraties for we all get to point our fingers at somebody else, and at the end of the day, nobody really is sort of on the hook for it. That's the person who said this is what needs to occur. So, yeah, I'm very concerned by this move. I've talked about it at length. It directly pertains to both U.S. and Thai immigration law as well as just general international travel. So I think it's something that should most assuredly be on people's radars as something to be concerned about going into the future. And I also find it very, very weird and, again, scary that, you know, beyond even that, it's not like we're talking about like the full body of the UN votes on this. This is like a small cohort of folks that work in an international public health capacity, just sort of passing this dicta or diktat out there and just saying this is what we're going to do. Because that is what happened. Anybody that looks back on this and doesn't see that, because we now have the timelines. We know when certain determinations were made, and those determinations triggered some very substantial changes to the way our lives worked for a very prolonged period of time without any way of really getting any accountability for A, who did it and why, and B, how did we reverse it when under many different circumstances it was clear that a lot of these protocols were not overly necessary. So, I mean, the thing to take away from this video is keep an eye on this, because moving forward, I'm very concerned about the fact that we may see, I hope we learn from what we went through. That's my big thing. I want there to be something akin to a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or something to and not to place blame. I want to be clear on that too. I don't think there's any point in that. Everybody went through it. Everybody, you can probably go out there and point to some people that could have done better or something of this nature. No point. I don't see any point to that. I think what would be better is to go back and study how this happened so that in the future, even if it's determined that we need to take special steps to deal with, for example, a disease out there, that we can do it in such a way that mitigates against the worst excesses of what we went through, because there were major excesses. Look, I saw people die. I know people that committed suicide as a result of basically being completely thrown out of work, being totally despondent, and having nowhere to turn because they were just completely isolated, and they lived in a very cash economy kind of setup, and everything just dried up quite literally overnight. They were unable to make money from one day to the next and thereby support themselves, and it caused multiple people to take their own lives. That alone should be motivation enough to seriously at least scrutinize these major changes that seem to be in the works, and to scrutinize the activity that occurred over the course of those years so that for the future we can make some better decisions that don't result in quite honestly, the tragedies that we saw over those months.